What is up, everybody? John the Morgal here. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things that have sort of stumbled across my path, or my path has stumbled across in the last week or two. Um, One of the things that I thought was really interesting, especially coming from a quote-unquote conspiracy theorist like me, Pablo Escobar, the drug lord, the cocaine drug lord from South America. Well, his son wrote a book, sort of a tell-all book, and clearly states that Mr. Escobar, his dad, was working with the CIA. What do you know? Doesn't this sort of validate everything that we've been saying about, well, for example, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton back in Arkansas smuggling guns out and hardcore drugs in to Mena, Arkansas during Slick Willie's gubernatorial time in Arkansas? And oh, that's just a silly conspiracy theory. And oh, I saw that Denzel Washington movie, and yeah, that's Hollywood stuff, man. That's not actually real. What are you thinking? The CIA, those are the good guys. Those are the guys who always win, and they're allowed to kill people, and that's all cool because they're the CIA. Well, not really. As far as we can tell, the CIA probably had a lot to do with JFK's assassination. No thanks to the Bush family, I'm sure of that. But the CIA and all these government institutions are parasites. And then you get into the WikiLeaks dumps, where these national spying agencies are. I mean, and this isn't anything that we didn't already know, but it's confirmation of it. And it makes you wonder: is the mainstream narrative pushing out all this truth in order to, uh, get people sucked in? I mean, that'd be a stupid move. But I've been saying for years that the DEA and the CIA and different drug agencies and government agencies have been the ones responsible for bringing drugs into America, and especially the inner cities. And this confirms it, coming from Pablo Escobar's own son. The other thing I wanted to touch on real quick is the indiscriminate, it seems, bombing that doesn't really seem to be getting too much mainstream media coverage in the Arabian Peninsula. Um, you know, f- I just really hate to say this, but for those of us out there, and I'm not some liberal, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican either. Nothing anymore, really. It's a two-party false dichotomy system. It's put there in order to divide people as opposed to, bring us together so that they can control us with talking points. Um, but so I'm not saying this from any sort of partisan position. Um, War is bad. It just is. And, according to the United States narrative, and there's lots of Trump supporters who are just hopping on board with this because, it's Trump's presidency, but we're bombing people in the Arabian Peninsula. And, they might kill some terrorists, whatever that even means anymore. Um, but that doesn't mean that, innocent people aren't going to be affected, injured, killed by these same bombs. And so, to me, it's hypocritical because if Barack Obama were the one in the seat, in the hot seat now, in the president's seat, and those bombs were being dropped, the same alt-right alternative news sources would be condemning these sort of bombings. But instead, because it's Trump, the man of the people, Trump, then those are good bombs. And that's ridiculous. It really is. And, we already know that the CIA created Al Qaeda. Um, ISIS is the CIA. I mean, or the Israelis trained them up, and we paid for it. And according to the mainstream narrative, we're bombing Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, so it's okay, right? That's their claim. But didn't we? Isn't the CIA the ones under Barack Obama's care that created Al Qaeda, or maybe it was under Bush's? Who knows? Yeah, Al Qaeda was under Bush's, and then ISIS is the new one that sprung up more recently. But in any case, whenever they were established is irrelevant. It's us who are funding them and creating these people. And even according to government sources, Osama bin Laden, Obama bin Biden, Osama bin Laden was trained by the CIA. Saddam Hussein was allies with the Americans, and he was put into power because he was Sunni instead of Shia, and they were more, willing to deal with the white devil. So let's take a look at this Republican Democrat dichotomy for the last, say, 20 years, and let's see where it's taken us. So we'll start with Bill Clinton, and you guys already know how I feel about him. Look at the Clinton murders. There's lots of people dying, and continued right up through Hillary's presidential campaign, dying around the Clintons. Government agencies wanting to ask them pointed questions about possible nefarious activity way back when he was still governor of Arkansas. So instead of Bill Clinton getting in trouble for these sort of things, really hard, bad hardcore stuff like running drugs, running guns, murder, and that's about as hardcore as it gets, right? What was he impeached for? Well, it was the most famous blowjob in the history of ever. That's the one, complete with a blue dress with the jizz stain on it as the damning evidence, right? And so to me, that was sort of a slap in the face of the people who were after the Clintons. I mean, really, the whole thing started with underhanded real estate deals that Hillary was invested in, and Bill sort of helped her achieve through his power, as governor of Arkansas. But so when Clinton was impeached, everybody sort of ran away from the Democrat side, which is intentional, and we got W. George W. Bush. And it's funny because his whole cabinet basically was members or affiliated with this think tank called PNAC, the Project for a New American Century. And PNAC was a neoconservative, ultra-conservative, right-wing group that wrote this manifesto called "Rebuilding America's Defenses." This was pre 9/11. This was like a full year and then some, if I'm not mistaken, prior to 9/11 2001, prior to Bush's election, when they essentially wrote in this Rebuilding America's Defenses document that they have a goal for the future of America in the 21st century, which we're in now, obviously. They had a goal for the 21st century, kicking it off, to sort of reposition America as the dominant force of the world. And their whole mentality was is they wouldn't be able to pull this off because, by the way, a lot of these guys have affiliations with the military industrial complex. As sad as it is to say, it's extremely lucrative to be in the war business, right? And so these guys, these Illuminati guys with PNAC, they said that in order to, get the American people on board with their vision of the 21st century, then they would really need some sort of a catalyzing event, uh, something like a new Pearl Harbor. And that's almost a direct quote, if not a direct quote, but it's very close. That's essentially what they said, is that they wanted some sort of a new Pearl Harbor in order to the catapult America into the 21st century. And of course, within just a few months of W's election, they got it. They got exactly what they wanted in terms of the September 11th attacks. And really, they had, even though a lot of people didn't really like George W. Bush, his approval rating went, skyrocketed, and everybody rallied the wagons behind this idea that we needed to go to war against terror, right? A war against terror, as ridiculous as that is. And we're still sort of feeling the repercussions of that today. And of course, that's exactly what they wanted. The war on drugs still hasn't ended, and that's been going on for decades. And of course, the DEA and the CIA are at fueling that fire by bringing drugs in, especially into the inner cities, bringing drugs overseas into America so that they will have a function. So that's the number one goal of any government institution, is to preserve the need for their function and to, I mean, this is a poor analogy, but if you run a fire department, if you think like these guys, then you need covert arsonists on the fire department to go start the fire so that you guys will have something to do. That's exactly what the DEA has done. That's exactly what the war machine has done. And, with September 11th, they got the American people behind this effort. And they have since, overtaken Iraq, left it in misery. The Middle East is ablaze with conflict. And it's just a matter of time before the next the next big invasion. I mean, they this, as far as their plans are concerned, this is never going to end, regardless of the president, unfortunately. And we'll get to Trump. Right. So we got 8 years of Bush, and that was just phew, that was a doozy. So Bush doesn't get impeached at all, which is ridiculous because to this day, him and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all these PNAC, Project for New American Century Illuminati asshole guys, could literally be hanged for war crimes if they leave the United States and go to certain countries that'll actually enforce international laws. America apparently doesn't, if you're the president or in his cabinet. Right. So after Bush, people were running away from Republicans. Does that sound familiar at all? Yeah, yeah, a little bit. But this time it was different. It wasn't just a blowjob. Everybody's thinking that this dude's crazy. There was, most people figured out by the time that W was done being president that it was planned all along to have that never-ending war that we're still in. And so people saw Barack Obama, and I'll just mention this real quick. Before Obama even decided to run, I saw there was some kind of news thing where he did a speech. And I wished I could pull it up, but I'll never find it. I might could if I looked for it, but this was before anyone knew really who Barack Obama was. It was before he was announced that he was running for president. They were sort of putting him out in the mainstream. And I saw a speech that he did, and I told my buddy, I was like, that guy there is going to be the next president because he was saying exactly the things that people needed to hear from a politician after 8 years of Bush. I mean, it was a common sense thing to run away from rich, old, plutocratic white dudes. And, Barack Obama seemed to fit that role very well, to a T, in fact. He was the first black president, so you had a lot of people supporting him just for that alone. And it was almost as if, well, the dude got a Nobel Peace Prize before he had even done anything. It was like they must have selected him for that Peace Prize the instant he was elected. And, I guess you could probably research this, but I'd really like to know the grounds that they gave him that Peace Prize for. It's sort of convoluted, but he hadn't done anything. He had been president. He couldn't have been president for more than a few months before they made the selection because they don't just pick the name out of a hat that night. Those ceremonies are planned in advance. So, honestly, I was very excited about Barack Obama's presidency. I really was. After 8 years of George Bush, I figured, this young, seemingly intelligent dude with morals and a plan to change things. It sounded great. But unfortunately, what we got with Barack Obama after it was all said and done, when the campaign promises had worn off and, you know, the American people, a lot of them gave him a free pass on things that any other politician would have been, impeached for, like all of the signing statements and whatnot. But my real beef is just the fact that we're still in this perpetual war that benefits nobody at all except for, a few, just handfuls of companies that get these massive government contracts. Now, that word government contracts is thrown around a lot, but we're talking about multiple billions of dollars coming from our tax money that the corporate federal government doles out to its cronies in terms of the bombs that they drop and the planes that fly them and everything else. So Barack Obama did not change the war. He didn't change anything important. And we got just more of the same as we did with Bush. And so at that point, it became obvious to me that really no matter who we get, they're not going to be representative of the people. And yet somehow they, being the mainstream media, they have pulled it off to really convince a lot of people who otherwise would have never been convinced that anyone, any president, is going to be a representative, at least somewhat of their, morals, right, or their, the way that most normal people would do things, which would be to not bomb other people and send our soldiers off to fight and die in foreign deserts, for the sake of what? Well, there's a lot of reasons. People say terrorism, people say oppression. We need to be over there, this, that, and the other, because then the region will fall apart if we're not. Um, at the end of the day, though, we have no business over there at all. We have no business wasting our money on things like that. And so it would be very difficult to convince me any future president is going to, make decisions that are representative whatsoever of what I believe any normal person should or would do. And so the way that they did it, I think, with Donald Trump, and I'm still sort of optimistic. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is necessarily going to be, a third generation of Bush in terms of the war, but it really appears that way. Donald Trump has filled his cabinet with, CEOs of sort of ruthless corporations or former CEOs of corporations, and these are obviously not people that are representative of your average person, your average citizen. And so, to convince people who are otherwise very wary of government, especially after Clinton, Bush, and Barack Obama, people are always like, well, why are you so against government? What is the government? Well, look at the last three presidential terms. Look at the last 20 years. Look at what the country has done. Look at what we've become. Most of our manufacturing jobs are gone and overseas, and the only thing that we really export is war, bombs on brown people, more or less. That's really what it amounts to. None of them have done anything to change it. The Federal Reserve scam is another huge problem that really no one has talked about except for Ron Paul. In terms of presidential candidates, nobody's even talked about it except Ron Paul since JFK. And so, I don't see Trump making any moves on the Fed. And, that leads me to one of two conclusions. Either he's just as deceived as everyone else about the Fed, or he totally understands what's going on with the Fed and he's benefiting from it. Either one of these answers is not a valid excuse, in my opinion, for the president. Ignorance isn't a valid excuse. And so, you know, at worst, he's ignorant, and at best, he's in on it. Okay. But in order to convince people that Trump was a man of the people, instead of him actually being a man of the people, then of course he was ostracized by the media. The polls projected that he would lose. Um, these sorts of things. First of all, I should mention, Donald Trump is probably the first person to be famous for being a rich asshole. Okay. 20 years ago, there weren't reality shows about everything, so you didn't have Paris Hilton and the Kardashians and whatnot. So being a rich asshole was something that you did, and you didn't become famous for it. But except unless you're Donald Trump, okay. And so for decades, this guy really got under people's skin. And the long and short of it is, he's a TV actor, multi-deca billionaire, and he's the world famous rich asshole. Okay. So, in order to convince people that he is representative of the American people somehow, the media ostracized him, which is frankly the only thing that they could have done to support him. Because enough people are awake that the mainstream media is a joke and a lie, that if they would have full heartedly supported him, he'd have been no better than Hillary Clinton, honestly. And so that was really the best thing that ever happened for Donald Trump, is the mainstream media abandoned him. The Republican Party abandoned him. And that really, that makes sense to me why they would do that, in order for him to win, or in order for him to be accepted, because I really just have trouble believing that our votes even really count. I mean, they really don't in terms of the Electoral College, but even on the state level, you know, there's too many variables. They use computers. Computers are going to be hacked and messed around with and manipulated by the people in at the upper levels. I mean, it's going to happen. Or they're just going to be programmed to count double votes. There's so many different ways that this could be done. And the voting machines have always been a problem, whether it was the physical cards with the hanging chads, all the way to hackers and faulty computer programs that are designed to get one person to win. And so I just don't see that, necessarily they had to convince people to elect Trump. Trump, I believe Trump was selected. And the best thing that could have happened to him, in terms of people accepting him as president, was the mainstream media would have to abandon him, and the Republican Party would have to abandon him. Because you see, we're not that stupid. We've just seen this happen too fast over one lifetime. See, normally this sort of political changes that we've seen in the last 20 years would happen over 50 or 100. But we've just seen things changing so fast that we've caught on to it. You can't trick us with the same trick 4 or 5 times. So, in other words, we're not going to run from Bill Clinton's blowjob to Bush, then from Bush's war to Barack Obama and Bush's war back over to the other side. It doesn't keep working like that. People are wising up. And so, to me, the only way that Trump could have been accepted, especially by the very usually skeptical and savvy alternative media, really fell for this, because all the signs were there that, this guy is a rogue. This guy is a man of the people, but, frankly, he's a rich asshole and famous for it. You can't argue with me there. He was the first, really, as far as I know, to the level of where he's at, where they make reality shows with him, firing people. I mean, really? So that's who we want to be president, the guy who acts on reality shows firing people. And so, to me, like I said, I've been optimistic, but when I see the bombs falling on the Arabian Peninsula without really being mentioned, and when it is, it's mentioned in a positive light by Trump supporters. And so, to me, this is the psychology that they use. Really clearly, I can see what they're doing is, for some reason, people feel like as if they can relate to Trump for some reason, because he has been painted as this rogue man of the people, which, I'm sorry, anybody that I know would not allow for bombs to be indiscriminately dropped on the Arabian Peninsula without the consent of the American people, with really out us knowing. And what did they do to provoke it? Are acts of war really that easy to be, you know, warranted by the American government is apparently the South Arabian Peninsula has terrorists there, and so they're just going to bomb it. And it's not just there. I mean, we see rumors of war all over the place, and you know, in terms of Russia and the United States, I'm sorry, but it's just very apparent to me, at least, that the United States and Russia have been allies all throughout the Cold War. There never was this animosity that's been depicted. We've been allies ever since World War II. But in order to control people, in order to get people to go the way they want, and I know this sounds like a very abstract concept, but when you see it used in practice, it becomes very obvious that it's a highly effective way that they control people, especially large masses of people. And that's, it's just plainly obvious that's what they're doing. In order to get people to agree with what this really quite hideous and evil government is doing, then they put people in place that people feel like for somehow they can relate to, and so therefore whatever is going on, and that person is in the hot seat, then that's all fine, and we have to sort of rally behind them. And frankly, that's exactly what we don't need to be doing. We have no business over in basically every country in the world policing the world while the home country goes to down the shit river, which is exactly what's happening. I mean, we've got ghost cities. We've got an economy that is built on lies and essentially debt slavery in terms of the Federal Reserve and members FDIC fractional reserve uh, platforms, which essentially effectively does nothing except for print and loan our money out of existence. Right. And so Donald J. Trump is not doing anything about that, nothing about the war. We're seeing more and more war rhetoric, and, you know, maybe he has no choice. Again, I mean, I guess I'll still give him the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, I'm not that stupid. And I realize that in order to get to the level where he's at in terms of business, then you essentially have to be on board with this more or less Zionist agenda. Um, and there's more to it than just that, but that's a big part of it. It's just such a weird, bizarre thing because you have right in the same sort of concoction, you have fascist Nazi ideologies and Zionist ideologies wrapped up into one. It's very bizarre, but it's there. I mean, the connections and the ideologies. In terms of Nazis, look at Bush and Bush, and Bush one's daddy, Prescott Bush, was trading. He was found to be trading with the enemies during World War II. So there's your connection, and just look at the practices of the Americans and the Germans leading up to America's involvement in the war. Pearl Harbor, the false flag incident of that era. We were very much on the same level with the German people in terms of science and politics and eugenics, and there was definitely that connection. And now we see the sort of Talmudic Zionist connection in the media and in the government. And I'm not saying let's start bashing anyone because of their race. I'm saying there's simply no room for despotry and bigotry in this world, and that just appears what we're allowing to control things. Appears to be what we're allowing to control things is just this force, this sort of blind, ignorant, evil force is pulling the uppermost strings of American geopolitics, and people were tricked again, but this time they couldn't do it the same way. That's sort of the essence of what I wanted to convey here is we're getting more of the same with Donald Trump. And I know, he's only been in office a few months. Maybe they'll give him a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't think so. That wouldn't fit the narrative, right? So I hope that Trump does good things, and I'll support him to the extent that he's the president, and to me, what difference does it make if Hillary were the president? Because we'd probably still be bombing the South Arabian Peninsula last week, or probably right now as I record this, who knows? But they were doing it just a few days ago, and it wasn't widely reported. We got a lot of rumors of stuff about North Korea and Russia and this and that, but it wasn't. I mean, maybe it was. I don't watch the mainstream media anymore, but you just think that there would have been more internet buzz around these, terrorist bombings in the South Arabian Peninsula last week. You'd think that there'd be more buzz around Pablo Escobar's son admitting that his dad was working with the CIA. And, the whole really Escobar played a big role in that drug war. And it just goes to show you that these government institutions aren't to be trusted. People say that, about people like it's a derogatory statement. Oh, they don't trust the government. They're a conspiracy theorist. Well, frankly, I mean, if you don't trust a known pathological psychotic liar, then you really can't blame somebody for that, right? And so when you see that the government in the form of the CIA has been lying, or the DEA has been lying about the drug war, lying about Escobar, they were funding him. Probably people like Bill Clinton at the very top positions, like governor, were the ones responsible for running those drugs in and guns out of Mena, Arkansas. And people have said, "Oh, that's a silly conspiracy theory," and now we get confirmation that the South American drug lords were indeed working with the CIA in this vast, unimaginably vast drug business. And so, in Afghanistan, for example, you've got vast poppy fields, which is what a lot of those farmers apparently are solely farming now because of the U.S. crave for the heroin trade. So I don't know. It's just so much crazy stuff going on, and the important things get ignored, and we see the unimportant things being pushed, as important when they're just not. When you see also that entities like NASA have been lying about everything from going to the moon to the very shape and nature of the Earth since their inception. And in fact, there's Nazi ties with NASA as well in terms of the Operation Paperclip. There were thousands of Nazi scientists smuggled through the rat lines to America to help spearhead NASA, including Werner von Braun as the sort of the most high profile. But it certainly was more than just one Nazi dude, right? How can you possibly trust the government unless you're just totally brainwashed? So, don't say that like it's such a bad thing. And at the same time, we need to be able to live in a world where we can trust our government, and the government that we have is just simply totally corrupt from the ground up. The Constitution, is no longer even a living document, it would seem, because for whatever that's worth, because civil rights are essentially non-existent. Um, the United States of America has the largest prison population in the world per capita, and I believe in terms of bulk number, and probably in history the largest prison population in world history, because there are a lot of violent criminals due to a product of the mainstream narrative. That's what they want to breed. And I'm sorry, but if you're sitting in front of the TV for 6 hours a day on average, and not doing much else with your time but working, you're going to think a certain way based on all of those shows and movies that you've watched that are directed by people who that are specifically trying to program the way that we behave, subtly at times, and very profoundly at other times, as subtly as buying a Coca-Cola over a Pepsi, which seems sort of trite, and it is, but they spend billions of dollars on that. And then, of course, you have a more sort of profound decisions that we make, or things that we approve of, based on this mind control machine. And they know what they're doing. So I just think that it's important that we're careful. Um, Update on the book. It's coming along great. I've got over 70 pages done with diagrams. It's going really well. In terms of the crowdsourcing, so far we've raised $1,113.68. I want to thank everybody that has contributed. I'll put up a link here that you can support the effort. My first stationary plane flat Earth book. Um, so I'll be working. I am working on that, and I'll be working on that for probably a couple months. But it is doing really well. People are supporting, so that's great. Thank you guys so much for that. And with that, I'm probably going to peace out. It's been sort of a long day, and I'm a bit tired. But I just wanted to sort of mention these few things really quickly because I couldn't believe it. I found out that Pablo Picasso's, is that his first name? Am I saying this wrong the whole time? I bet you I am. Pablo Picasso, Pablo Escobar. Let me just check this first. I have to see now. Yeah, his name's definitely Pablo Escobar. Uh, yeah, that's just crazy. His son came out and admitted that the CIA was involved or backing, allowing Escobar to operate. I mean, that's really no surprise to me, but sometimes you have to hear it from the horse's mouth. God bless you all. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace.